Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your host for The Voice of Leadership and for Dr. Karen Speaks Leadership. And this is the show for executive business leaders who appreciate a biblical perspective on life and leadership. Today is Election Day in the United States, and we're talking about the subject of why vote. And this is a very important topic. Hopefully, by now, you have already voted. However, if you haven't, then definitely take the time to listen in today to get some ideas about why voting is important. One thing I want to mention is that researcher George Barner, who has been doing research particularly on issues of interest to Christian people for more than 40 years, has issued some new information which suggests that 50% or more of people who say they are Christians are planning not to vote in this year's election. And that's actually a tragedy that so many people are planning not to vote. There are about at least 85 million people who say that they are Christians. And if half of those or more do not vote, that is more than 40 million people. And that's enough to make a difference in the election results. Those who say that they're not planning to vote, almost 70% are saying that they don't have an interest in politics or in elections. There are about another 57% who don't like the candidates that are being offered in this election. And there are many, about half, 50% or so, saying that they don't believe that their vote will make a difference. And others are saying at the 50% level that the election is too controversial. So, what we have to understand is that God does care about governments. God does care about elections. And those of us who live in countries where we have an opportunity and an option to participate in the government and the opportunity to vote for our candidates, I think that God would have us to be the salt and light and influence that He's created us to be, so that we would have better options for our country and for the world because of the fact that we're weighing in and we are offering our votes to make a difference. So keep in mind that collectively, all of our individual votes really do matter and do make a difference. And they can make a difference from a little bit of suffering to a lot of suffering in the future. So I would say I'm going to urge you to vote. Now let's understand the biblical position on governments and government authorities. And you've heard many times, I'm sure, the scriptures that are in Romans, the 13th chapter, verses 1 through 7. And I want to read these because they're so relevant even now. And for those of you who are feeling discouraged, do understand that God has a purpose and a plan. So Romans, the 13th chapter, starting with verse 1 says, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due: taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. So, what we must understand is that God is not anti government. He put the governments in place for our own protection to restrain evil and evil doing and to have a punishment and consequence for those who would do the wrong thing. Ideally, those who are innocent and are not living a problematic life should not have problems with the government. And we know that sometimes that's not true. And even in the biblical days, God's people often lived in circumstances and under conditions where the rulers were harsh. And of course, God's people at various times would cry out to God, and God would indeed respond and help them. So the government is here by God's plan and direction. And those leaders who do not serve well, who oppress the people of God, who do the wrong things, God will take care of them. They will still have to answer to God, whether in this life or in the life after, or in both. And some people have been even taken out in this life because of how they've chosen to lead, and God removed them, God replaced them. So we want to understand then that even our government is ordained by God, and also we are required to pay taxes. We are required to follow the customs and rules of the government so long as they do not violate what God has already also said. And just in case you're wondering, well, is that the only place where we have this information? And the answer is no. We also find something very similar in the book of First Peter, and this is in chapter 2 and verses 13 through 14. And here it says, "Therefore submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of those who do good." And this is important. So God cares about whether we are doing the right thing on this earth or not. And when we have opportunity to participate, because we live in a country that has elections, or is a republic or democracy or something of that sort, we are to benefit from those benefits. And I want to remind you that even the Apostle Paul, who was a Roman citizen, there were many times in his life and in his journey when he invoked that information and knowledge, and he would say to his jailers or captors, "Is it lawful for you to beat me, a Roman citizen?" And then they would fear, and they would be quaking in their boots, because they knew that as a Roman citizen, Paul had rights, and he was not to be beaten or to be punished without a fair due process and trial. That wasn't true of people who weren't Roman citizens, but as a Roman citizen, he had those privileges. And as American citizens, we also have privileges as well, and an opportunity to vote in behalf of the privileges that we have. I also want to remind you that even Jesus, when he was asked questions about what we should do or not do about the government and governing authorities, he also weighed in and said that we need to do the right thing. So let me give an example. This is in Mark, the 12th chapter, starting with verse 13, and we'll read through the 17th verse. And this is a scenario in the life of Jesus when he was walking on the earth. It says, "Then they sent to him some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him in his words. When they had come, they said to him, 'Teacher, we know that you are true and care about no one, for you do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay?' But he," meaning Jesus, "knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, 'Why do you test me? Bring me a denarius that I may see it.' So they brought it, and he said to them, 'Whose image and inscription is this?' They said to him, 'Caesar's.' And Jesus answered and said to them, 'Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' and they marveled at him. They had put him in a position that they thought was no win, because if he said, don't pay taxes, then that would certainly get him in trouble with the Roman government at the time. And if he said, pay taxes, and these God's people at the time were being oppressed by excessive taxes from the Roman government, then clearly he's not in favor of God's people. But he answered quite wisely and let them know that this coin, this denarius, has the image of Caesar on it. Give back to Caesar what belongs to him. So as Christians, we do both. We give back to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and we give to God what belongs to God. It's not either or. We're in a both and kind of situation. And unless we think that Jesus is preaching this but not practicing it, I want to share a scene out of his life where he has an opportunity to demonstrate that he also is living by what he is preaching. So in Matthew, the 17th chapter, we see a scene that is between Peter and Jesus, and we'll start this at the 24th verse, and it says, when they had come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, does your teacher not pay the temple tax? And he said, yes. And when he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers? Peter said to them, from strangers. Jesus said to them, then the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you. So we see here there's a tax in question. It was the temple tax. And Peter answered the authorities, yes, we do pay the taxes. And he went to Jesus about it. And Jesus told him where to find the provision. Jesus said, look, I'm the Son. I am the Son of God. I am the creator of the world. As God, I sustain the world. And even I, because I am living here in this human body, this incarnation, will be an example to you and pay this temple tax. And so Jesus told him to go to this fish that he would catch in the sea, and in the fish's mouth would be enough money to pay the temple tax for both of them. So though he was God and didn't technically have to pay the temple tax, he certainly did. And clearly we are not God, and we do have to pay the taxes that are relevant for whatever country and environment in which we live. We also want to remember that it is our responsibility to pray for the governments that we do have and wherever they may be. And this is really important because we do this so that it will go well with us on this earth and on this planet and where we live. And even in the first covenant times, the people were encouraged when they would come to Jerusalem to humble themselves before God and to pray before God about whatever it was that they needed, whatever was going on in their lives. And God promised that he would listen, that he would tune his ear to their pleas and to their cries, and that he would purify their land and operate on their behalf. And so we see then also in 1 Timothy 2, and this would be starting with the first verse, we find that we are exhorted even in today's time to pray for the countries and lands where we're going. And God's people back in the day, even when they were in captivity, even when they were enslaved, were told to pray for the countries where they lived for their own sake. And we must do the same. So 1 Timothy 2, starting with verse 1 says, therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. Whoever is in government, whoever is in authority, whether we like them or not, whether they're good people or not, whether they do right or do wrong, we are to pray for them for our own sakes, that it would go well with us in the land. That's for people who live in kingdoms, as in some regions of the world, and those who live under presidents, those who are under governors, or whatever the authority may be. Hi, it's Dr. Karen here, reminding you that change is very challenging and difficult, even under the best of circumstances. If you are going through an organizational change, it goes better when you know the steps, the order of the steps, and what to do. So contact me to walk through what will work best for your organization. I can be reached at Dr. Period Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. And what we want to remember in this election, there's a lot at stake. At stake, we want to think about preserving our freedom as a nation. That's a freedom to be able to worship in peace. Many of the people who came to this new territory and land were leaving other countries and other places because they did not have freedom of worship. And so here in the United States, historically, we have freedom to worship in whatever way we choose and whomever we choose. And so we want to retain the freedom of worship. And when I say that as a Christian person, I'm not just saying freedom for us as Christians, freedom for whoever and however others may choose to worship in the United States. They have freedom as well, and we want to preserve that. This is not to become a country where everyone is forced to be into a particular religion, a particular church, or to even follow Christianity. Jesus said, whosoever will, let him come. That means we have choices, and not everyone is going to choose Christianity, and that is their right. Nor are they required to pick a specific kind of church or denomination should they choose to follow Christianity. So we want to continue to have freedom of religious expression, choice, and worship. We also want to have freedom for speech. Freedom of speech on a variety of subjects, not just in the religious arena, but freedom of speech, period, to be able to voice what our viewpoint is and to share that with other people on any subject rather than to have viewpoint discrimination or to have the government silence those viewpoints and thoughts that maybe the prevailing government does not agree with. So we want to preserve freedom of speech. We want to preserve our personal choice and agency to make decisions for ourselves about where we're going to live, decisions about whether we're going to accept or reject medical treatments of one sort or another. The next pandemic may be coming around the corner, and we want to have agency about how to treat that pandemic in our own personal life, whether to take a pharmaceutical approach, to take an alternative approach, to do a combination. There are many ways to address illnesses and health threats. And we as American people, we want the choice to be able to decide for ourselves with informed consent about whatever it is that we're doing. We're not in an authoritarian government, nor do we wish to move in that direction. So we want the freedom to pursue life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness as American citizens. So we know that the government is there as a protector, to provide law enforcement, to maintain law and order. We know that the courts are there to make sure that people are treated properly, treated fairly, and that marginalized groups like the poor and the needy and the widows and orphans are not oppressed, so that people with money are not buying off the court system and getting away with murder, while those without the money or resources don't have a voice in court. So we want to live in a country where even those without financial resources, even those who are lower on the totem pole, still will get a fair treatment in the judicial process of our nation. We also think that it's really important to keep in mind the relationships that we have with other governments. We want to maintain our relationships with our allies, with our other partners around the globe. We want to be able to support our allies and partners across the globe, our friends who also champion democracy in their regions and in their lands. We also want to make sure that we have a say in the wars that are going on. As a person who was formerly in the Army, I understand that the cost of war is extremely high. And it's a choice you only want to make when you have to. And sometimes you really do have to, because there is evil that needs to be attended to on the globe and on the earth when people are overflowing their boundaries and oppressing other people. We have a couple of wars going on right now, the war with Russia and Ukraine. We have the war in the Middle East with Israel and the terrorist organizations of Hamas and Hezbollah. And all of those need to be attended to in one way or another. And we want leaders in the office of president, in the cabinet of the president, in the Congress, in the Senate, leaders who will make wise choices and wise decisions. And so it's important that we exercise our right to vote so that we are participating in who gets selected. It is indeed both a privilege to vote and also a responsibility to vote. We are here on this earth to make a difference as salt and light. And if we withhold our vote, we are choosing not to influence the society for the greater good. And if we are the people that are speaking to God, that are hearing from God, that have access to the wisdom of God, then it is a tragedy not to also bring that wisdom, salt, and light to the election process. And I understand that you may believe there is no great or appropriate candidate for the election. As an African American person who's been around a long time, and I will include my parents' day as well, there were many elections that we faced when there really was not a candidate we could vote for. However, we still had to vote for the best out of even two really difficult or inappropriate options. And many more besides African American people may be feeling that dilemma today. And my parents voted even when they felt there was no one for them to vote for. I vote every election because I know that many Black people died. Many Black people sacrificed. They were killed attempting to vote. They were prevented to vote even after the Voting Rights Act was passed. And because of their sacrifices and what they did so that I would have the option to vote, I do not miss the opportunity to vote. And I want you to think about the fact that many have made sacrifices for us to have a country where we can vote. And even for those who are women, the white women of our country, the women's suffragette movement, many sacrificed in that as well so that women had the right to vote. So we really do not want to have all of those who died to die in vain because we refuse to exercise our right, our privilege, and also our responsibility to participate in our form of government. And I want you to keep in mind that whoever you choose to vote for in this election, remember that character really does matter. When a person is of good and upstanding character, they are much more likely to do the right thing even under pressure, and even when the right thing may not directly benefit them personally and in the moment. They are thinking about what is right, what is good, and what is for the greater good. And that's what we want to keep in mind with candidates. When people are not of good character, We cannot be guaranteed what they will do, nor are they likely long term to do what is right. So we do want to take character into consideration. Now, I'm not saying that we have people of excellent character, of excellent moral standing. Again, you may have to select the lesser of two evils if that's how you see the election this year. And also remember that if your candidate is not on the ballot, if your candidate is not elected, if your candidate does not win, please remember, even if you are unhappy with the outcomes of the election, remember that God is still sovereign over this universe which he has created and which he continues to sustain. And as Psalm 22 says, dominion belongs to the Lord. And Psalm 46 reminds us to be still and know that I am God. And God says, I will be exalted among the nations. He did not say one nation. He said among the nations because he is Lord. He is king. He is sovereign over the entire universe. And remember, in history, God was able to turn the hearts of kings, even kings who didn't acknowledge him, kings who didn't believe in him, those who were rulers in authority. He turned their hearts and minds to benefit his people multiple times, whether that be King Nebuchadnezzar, King Darius, King Cyrus, and many others. And there were also times when kings were taken off the earth, taken out of office, killed because what they were doing was too egregious. And God said, your days are over. Your days are up. Your days are numbered. See the handwriting on the wall like King Belshazzar faced in his day and in his time. So remember, we have this responsibility to be salt and light in matters of government, to chase away the darkness, to make the taste of things better with the seasoning of the salt that we bring. We have the counsel of God, and we are here to make a difference. I also want to remind you, for those of you who think that governments are just a purview of the secular, there were a number of institutions that God actually put in place. One, he is the one who instilled families. Adam and Eve were the first marriage, husband and wife. And God is the one who presented Eve to Adam. And in his excitement, he said, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. And the scripture goes further to say that a man should leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And we know God blessed them, told them to be fruitful and to multiply. And we know that in the Christian family, God wants to have us raise up a godly seed before him. That is one of the main purposes of the family on the earth, God's institution. He's the one who created the family. And secondly, God also instituted governments. And we've read a number of scriptures to talk about the fact that God instituted these various governments. And so we want to participate in what God has instituted. We want to have an influence on that. We don't want to leave the world to its own devices or to the counsel of those who have only earthly wisdom, which we know is inferior and different from godly wisdom. So, as the carriers of godly wisdom, let us not be selfish. Let us share that with our neighbors and friends around us so that we all can benefit together. And then, thirdly, God also instituted the church. And he said that the church was his body. He's the head of the church. We are members of that body. We are arms and hands and eyes and ears, and we all need each other because the body can't be just an eye. The body can't be just an ear or a hand. We need all of us working together for the benefit of our spiritual health and well-being, for the benefit of our future life beyond this life. And Jesus is the one who promised that the gates of hell would not prevail against his church. So we are to participate in all three of these institutions that God has ordained: the family, government, and also the church. So, a couple of things I would encourage you to do as we are looking at this election day. Hopefully, you've already voted. And if not, if you haven't voted yet, please, number one, pray for wisdom and discernment before you vote, before you go to the polls, before you drop off your ballot in the drop off box today. Number two, call a friend to also encourage them to vote. Take a friend with you to the polls so that they are also sure to vote. And any Christian person who's talking about being discouraged, remind them that we serve a mighty God who is attuned to our voice, who's attuned to our cries, and who is watching to see if we will exercise our stewardship privileges and responsibilities to go out to vote. Because let us not complain if we will not even do what we can do and participate. The bottom line is we must trust God, obey God, and as Dr. Charles Stanley was famous for saying on a regular basis, and leave all the consequences to him. So we do what we can do in terms of trusting God, obeying God, going to the polls, casting our vote, and then whatever happens, happens. But let not more than 40 million ballots be missing from this year's election. And to those of you out there who are marketplace ministry leaders, meaning that you are Christians in a secular context, you are executive leaders, be an example. Be an example to your employees. Let them see that you are participating in your privilege as a citizen of the United States, that you are choosing to vote. Encourage them to do likewise. And each person is to vote as God leads them. It is not my job to tell you who to vote for. In prayer to God, he will lead you. He will guide you to the best candidate that you are to vote for in this election. So seek his wisdom, guidance, and counsel. And I am a firm believer that God has people in every one of our political parties. There are some who would lead you to believe that there are only Christians in the Republican Party, and that is just not true. Christians are in the Democratic Party in great numbers. Christians are in the Republican Party in great numbers. There are many Christian independents and Christians dispersed throughout the other viewpoints and perspectives as well. And so how God leads you, that's between you and God, and let him do so. Let him lead you in the best way that you should go for this election. And I would say this, when I think about my executive leadership clients, they are frequently as executives in situations where they must make difficult leadership decisions every day. And those decisions aren't always perfect. For example, you may have someone on your team that you need to select for a higher level role and position. That person may not be perfect, because none of us are. That person may have flaws, and yet with the right support and the right intervention, you can grow that person to be the person you need them to be in that role. In some situations, you don't have a person in front of you, either in-house or who you can bring in from outside. And a key position may need to remain vacant. And that also has severe and difficult consequences for your business and for your organization. And the way that I come alongside my executive leaders is to help them think through what is the wisdom that I should apply They're saying to themselves, right now, what decision should I make? Should I advance this person with support? Should I leave the position vacant? Should I continue to recruit and hire from outside? These are tough decisions, and there are other tough decisions as well. So remember, if I can help you to bring godly and biblical wisdom to your decisions, whatever they may be, then remember to contact me so that I can help you to create an organization that is beneficial to all of your members, all of your partners, and your clients and your customers. So please do that. You can reach me at Dr. Karen at transleadership.com. So today I would like to close with a reminder that no matter what happens, we serve a God who's waiting to hear from us, and we are not alone. So I will remind you of what Philippians, the 4th chapter, says in verses 6-7, and that is, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So with all the turmoil in the world today, with all the turmoil in our country, with all of the conflict and turmoil over this election, we should be the most peaceful people in our country and at the polls, because we know the God that we serve, and He's invited us to be anxious for nothing, rather to bring all of our concerns to Him. So have a blessed day, vote, participate in the process, and encourage others to do the same. Let your voice be heard as a voice of leadership on this election day. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, President and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated. Did you know that workplaces can make a significant difference in the lives of people, and that you can create a positive culture that gets positive business results and also produces positive life experiences for your employees and your clients and customers? You can make a significant contribution to the world by creating the kind of culture where your people can bring their gifts to provide the most relevant and excellent products and services to your marketplace. What the research shows is that companies with excellent leadership are also more profitable. So as you flourish and as you grow in the world, you can do more for yourself as well as for others. So if this is resonating with you and you want to create a positive, profitable, and powerful corporate culture, and you care about succession, leaving the organization in a better position than when you found it, do keep in mind that that kind of legacy is something that's intentional. And I am happy to partner with you to take your organization to the next level and create that positive leadership culture. So reach me at Dr. Karen, Karen, at transleadership.com. You've been listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. And I want to give a special thanks to jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan for granting us permission to use his gifted music on our show. Thanks for listening, and remember to go to my website, transleadership.com, for more strategies, insights, and leadership resources.